So the Department of Human Services, DHS, is the state's agency overseeing welfare, Medicaid, child nutrition, and housing programs. Over the last couple of days, a group claiming to represent over 480 current employees of that DHS publicly accused Governor Tim Walz of ignoring repeated internal warnings about widespread fraud in these programs. The fraud schemes, which federal prosecutors have linked to over $1 billion in stolen taxpayer funds, which are probably getting close to $2 billion at this point. You know of one at least, the $250 million Feeding Our Future scandal, child nutrition scandal. These these involve fake companies billing for non-existent services, often connected to Minnesota's Somali community. Of the 85 or so, I believe, people who have been convicted in the $250 million Feeding Our Future fraud, only one of them was a Caucasian female, and she converted, I believe, to is a converted Muslim a couple of years prior to this. She was, I think, the ringleader, and as far as I know, every other person who was charged is Somalian. So it is what it is. Some reports suggest portions of the funds may actually be diverted to terrorist groups like Al Shabaab. I've just heard that as well, that there is evidence that is. We know that immigrants who come here and make money legally, or in this case illegally, they often send it back. You know, Mexicans come up from Mexico, of course, they work their butts off and they often send a lot of money back home to their families. In this case, it's all fraud, and unfortunately, it's being sent, and at least some of it we think is going to Al Shabaab, which is an Al Qaeda affiliate, I believe. So, the employee's statement share via their X account at Minnesota DHS describe a cascade of systemic failures under Walz's leadership, including retaliation against whistleblowers and efforts to discredit fraud reports. So here are the claims that they made. Okay, Tim Walz is 100% responsible for massive fraud in Minnesota. They assert the fraud totals could exceed $6 billion since Walz took office in 2019, far beyond the $2 billion already uncovered by investigators. That's crazy. $6 billion allegedly. Employees say they notified Walz's office repeatedly starting years ago about issues like Medicaid overbilling and fake child nutrition programs, but received no action. One post from February 2025 noted over years, DHS staff have notified Tim repeatedly about fraud, yet we received no reply. So tactics allegedly include surveillance, berating staff in meetings. Lieutenant Governor Peggy Flanagan allegedly was one known for berating staff in meetings, and threats to families. The group also accused Walz of empowering commissioners to reject oversight from the Office of the Legislative Auditor. A January 2025 post called Walz the biggest fraud enabler of waste and retaliation against whistleblowers. That is a January 2025 post. They named specific appointees like former DHS Commissioner Jody Harpstead, who resigned in January 2025, and others for prioritizing image over fixes and failing to act on fraud alerts. They even had Tim, they say Tim fundamentally is dishonest. He lacks ethics and integrity, has poor leadership abilities, and has never taken any accountability for his roles in fraud. This ties into claims about ARPA. I don't know what that stands for, but I know it's funds from the COVID era. Funds were used to pad budgets and create jobs for Walz allies, inflating surpluses while fraud festered. A November 2025 post added, in all the years of fraud reports directly to his office, Tim has never responded. He has never responded once to any reports. Additional posts from the group echo these themes, such as a December 2024 warning about Medicaid fraud being far bigger than reported, and a November 2024 accusation that Walz is downright malicious for rejecting checks and balances. That's a year ago that they posted that. Now, so here's a tidbit on Fox News on
a new stunning report from the City Journal showing a massive fraud scheme in Minnesota. You have to hear about this. It involves false autism claims, the Somali community, and connections to a terror group. Let's explain over at The Wall. Now, it all revolves around autism and HSS program. That is Minnesota's Medicaid Housing Stabilization Services. Now, this was created to help seniors, addicts, and others find housing, but the criteria to enter this program was incredibly loose and therefore easy to take advantage of. It's led to fraud and costs absolutely exploding. Just 5 years ago, in 2020, costs for this program were $2.6 million. 4 years later, by 2024, cost had been over $100 million, 104. Through the first 6 months of this year, costs are at 61 million, meaning if you double that over the entirety of the year, you're looking at $122 million. In 5 years, from 2 million to 122 million. Now, why? 6 people are accused of defrauding HSS, and they're members of the Somali community. But this just gets worse if we take a look at Minnesota's federally funded autism program. Now, several people, and this is an example, a woman in the Somali community, are co-conspirators, and they're accused of recruiting kids for autism therapy. They brought in families, had them convinced to get their kids diagnosed as autistic. In fact, these families ultimately ended up having various social services bid for their children, competing with the number size of check that they would get. It didn't matter if the kids had autism. And what happened? Autism claims to Medicaid surged. In 2018, $3 million. By 2023, listen here, from $3 million to $400 million. Autism providers jumped from 41 to 328 in 5 years. Now, City Journal reports that the Somali fraud rings send a lot of money back to Somalia. 40% of households in Somalia get remittances from abroad. That totals $1.7 billion. That is more than the entire budget of the Somali government. Money being sent abroad, from abroad, back to Somalia. Where is that money going? Take a look at this. Most alarmingly, a lot of that money is funneled through money traders, and in the end, ends up in the hands of al-Qaeda-linked Islamic terror group Al-Shabaab. So to bring this full circle, the Minnesota taxpayers are funneling money through fraudulent autism claims back to Somalia, where that money lands in the accounts of Al-Shabaab.
There you go. Isn't that crazy? That's absolutely insane. And it's so insane that it can't be a mistake. You know that? It cannot be. This isn't by accident. This isn't ineptitude. It can't be. So all those claims from those DHS workers, those, I believe them to be true. Like, why, how could they not be true? How could not, I mean, in every one of these programs, there's massive fraud, and it goes on for years. And Tim Walz claimed just the other day on the, well, I can't remember what program he was on, but of course he says, well, we're a well-run state. Of course we attract criminals because we're well-run. I don't know how that works. How you're well-run, you attract criminals. In my line of work, if you're well-run, then you run the criminals out and send them somewhere else. Now, it cannot be ineptitude. So then, how is this being done? Besides just these programs with no oversight at all, and then when people try and report, they get told to shut up and go back and do their job. The retaliation. Peggy Flanagan apparently. His second in command is in meetings yelling at people who are trying to report massive fraud. That's a huge red flag that he knows about it, right? He absolutely knows about this, and he was covering it up. I mean, it's like I picture Minnesota over the last, maybe over all of Governor Tim Walz's tenure here, as a massive Ponzi scheme. They're just covering the fraud up, making it look like everything's okay. These programs are the increases to these programs, the amount of spending, like you just saw, from a couple of $1 million up to hundreds of millions of dollars in 5 years. That is not a mistake. That is absolutely not a mistake. That is on purpose. Who is responsible for it? You know, is Governor Walz got some sort of nest egg tucked away somewhere? Ilhan Omar, obviously, she is protecting the Somali community. Keith Ellison is protecting the Somali community while they're doing this. Keith Ellison is on record, not that he knew that he was being audio taped, on record saying that he would go against the state of Minnesota, as in fight the state of Minnesota, who he works for. He would fight against them to make sure that the program Feeding Our Future, the $250 million fraud scheme, would stay active and they would continue to get their flow of cash. So the next thing, of course, Chris Maddle, I guess is how you pronounce it. I just learned how you pronounce his last name. So he just announced today that he is running for governor. He is the attorney. Um, I know him as a defense attorney. Um, Ryan Londrigan's defense attorney, and he defended Alpha News, Liz Collin against Katie Blackwell in a lawsuit, a defamation lawsuit that Alpha News won. I don't know if they won, they got it thrown out, whatever, however you want to say it. It was a stupid lawsuit. Katie Blackwell is never going to win that. They can come after you. Katie Blackwell's a public employee, is a public person, and they can make the claims that they made in the fall of Minneapolis against her legally. So she got some terrible advice, and of course it looks bad because she had to pay out of pocket a bunch of money for that lawsuit that didn't go anywhere. Yeah, it was a lawsuit of emotion, I think, and she didn't get good legal advice, and so that's unfortunate. My my opinion of Mr. Maddle is he seems to be a really good attorney. I don't know if he would be a good governor or not, but he's thrown his hat in the ring saying absolutely, we cannot have Tim Walz as governor again. And I think everybody knows that. The interesting thing for me will be is Walz going to be able to make it through the next year, or is he going to get pushed out by the Democrats? Because he's such a disaster that I can't fathom that they would allow him. It's like Kamala Harris. Like, what a disaster. I know that there was not a lot of time for them. They dumped Joe Biden and they threw Kamala Harris in there. But what a disaster she was. But can you imagine having a year to prepare and you put Kamala Harris and you let Kamala Harris run? Same thing with Tim Walz. I mean, he's a complete disaster. He has no idea how terrible he looks. He's smug and he's a disaster. I mean, what he's done for this state is nothing but erode everything. A $5 billion or a $5 billion deficit that we have now from what, 17 or 18 billion-dollar surplus that I mean, it's just ridiculous what has been going on. So, but that's what's going to be interesting for me. We've got a whole bunch of Republicans that have thrown their hats in the ring, and and it'll be interesting if the Democrats will allow Walz to continue. I mean, allow. He can do whatever he wants, but if they're going to put somebody else up against him or not, because he should lose. I mean, there's no way with all of this that he should win. Crazier things have happened, but and then the other thing I wanted to talk about maybe in my next segment is the fraud as far as legislation that actually was coming down the pipe that they were actually working on that got shut down so that Governor Walz could put a executive order in place and make it look like he made the decision to finally stop the fraud and he was going to do it himself. I think he's taking a page out of Trump's book here, but he wrote an executive order trying to give himself the power to somehow stop this fraud, but he has been the one enabling the fraud for his entire tenure here. So it's very interesting to see that. It's very interesting to see that he did write an executive order. I don't know if he thinks he's fooling anybody. He's not fooling anybody. That silly executive order with everything that we have as far as evidence against him. So that's it for now. I'm Steve Loomis, walking that mile.